He was a billionaire, but empty inside. She was a woman with nothing but a soul full of music. When fate brought them together, he gave her everything: his wealth, his heart, his soul. When fate brought them together, he gave her everything: his wealth, his heart, his soul. But why? Uh, the truth behind his sacrifice will leave you speechless. A love story like no other. The sky was painted in shades of deep gray, heavy clouds rumbling as if nature itself carried the weight of unspoken sorrows. Rain lashed against the windshield of Aidan Kingsley's sleek black Rolls-Royce as it cruised through the dimly lit streets of New York. Inside, Aidan sat in silence, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other resting against his temple. His life was a symphony of success. A billionaire at 32, the owner of one of the most luxurious hotel chains in the world. Money, power, influence. He had it all. And yet, despite the world bowing at his feet, an emptiness gnawed at his soul, an unshakable void that wealth couldn't fill. Lost in thought, he barely noticed when his car rolled to a stop at a traffic light near a deserted park. And that's when he heard it, a haunting melody. Soft, melancholic notes drifted through the storm, weaving through the sound of raindrops. The tune was sorrowful yet mesmerizing, so raw, so full of pain that it sent a shiver down his spine. Aidan turned his head, his piercing blue eyes narrowing as he searched for the source. That's when he saw her. On a worn-out bench, drenched in rain, sat a woman, her thin frame curled around an old, weathered violin. Her fingers moved over the strings with effortless grace, eyes shut tight as if she were lost in another world, a place where only her music existed. She was barefoot, her clothes tattered, her dark hair sticking to her pale face. And yet, there was something about her, something ethereal. Aidan had seen beauty in all its forms: models draped in silk, actresses adorned in diamonds, women who threw themselves at his feet for a taste of luxury. But this woman was different. Her beauty wasn't the kind that demanded attention. It whispered, a silent pull that reached deep inside him. The light turned green, and his driver hesitated. Or should I keep going? Aidan didn't respond. He was frozen, captivated by the sight before him. Then, before he could think twice, he pushed the car door open and stepped out into the rain. An unlikely conversation. His leather shoes splashed against the wet pavement as he approached her. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge his presence. Up close, the sadness in her music was even more profound. It was as if her violin spoke for her, telling a story of pain, of dreams lost to the cruelty of fate. Aidan stood there for a moment, listening. Then, in a voice softer than usual, he asked, "Why are you playing in the rain?" The melody halted abruptly. The woman's eyes fluttered open, deep, soulful brown eyes that held a lifetime of pain. She stared at him, her expression unreadable, then tilted her head slightly. "Because the rain doesn't judge," she whispered. Her voice was soft yet firm, carrying the weight of someone who had known hardship, someone who had nothing left to lose. Aidan felt something stir in his chest, something he couldn't quite define. He had met thousands of people in his life. Powerful men, cunning women, liars, manipulators, and yet, in the middle of this storm, standing before a woman with nothing, he felt more intrigued than he ever had before. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "Elena," no last name, no explanation, just Elena. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Aidan reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of $100 bills, extending them toward her. "Come with me," he said. "I'll get you food, a warm place to stay." Her gaze flickered to the money, but instead of gratitude, there was something else in her eyes, something sharp. She stood slowly, her wet dress clinging to her slender frame, making her look even more fragile. Then, in a move that caught Aidan completely off guard, she pushed his hand away. I don't take pity, she said, her voice laced with quiet defiance. Aidan had never been rejected before, never. People begged for his attention, for his wealth, but this woman, she looked at him as if he was just another man in the crowd. His jaw tightened. It's not pity, he said evenly. It's an offer. She shook her head. You can't buy everything, Mr. Millionaire. His lips parted slightly, surprised that she already knew who he was. But before he could say anything else, she picked up her violin, turned away, and walked into the darkness. Aidan watched her go, the rain soaking through his expensive suit, his heart hammering in a way he didn't understand. For the first time in his life, a woman had refused him. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want to walk away. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want to walk away. Aidan Kingsley sat in his penthouse suite, his fingers tracing the rim of a crystal glass filled with expensive whiskey. But tonight, even the warmth of liquor did nothing to chase away the cold sensation creeping into his chest. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Elena, a woman with nothing, a woman who rejected his money, a woman who played the violin in the rain, as if pouring her soul into every note. Aidan had met thousands of people, some desperate, some deceitful, some hollow, like the empty glasses at high society parties. But Elena, she was different. She had fire in her eyes, sadness in her soul, and walls around her heart that even money couldn't break. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to know why. The next morning, before the sun even rose, Aidan made a call. Find everything you can about a woman named Elena. No last name, no address. But she plays the violin on 57th Street. His private investigator, the best money could buy, didn't even hesitate before answering. Consider it done. But hours later, the report he received was not what he expected. No records, no history, nothing. It was as if Elena Carter didn't exist. Aidan frowned as he read the details. How was that possible? Who was she? Later that evening, dressed in a dark coat, Aidan found himself standing at the same park bench where he had first seen her. The sky was cloudy again, threatening another downpour, but tonight the streets were quieter. And there she was, sitting beneath the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, violin cradled in her hands, eyes closed as she played. He watched her for a long moment, his heartbeat slowing, matching the rhythm of her soft melody. There was something tragically beautiful about her. The way her fingers danced across the strings, the way she swayed slightly with the music, the way her face held a quiet pain, one that she never spoke about. Taking a deep breath, Aidan finally stepped forward. You never answered my question, he said. Elena's eyes opened, her expression unreadable as she turned to him. Which one? Aidan leaned against the lamppost, his gaze locking onto hers. Why are you here? She let out a quiet sigh, setting her violin down beside her. Because this is where I belong. You don't belong on the streets, he said, voice firm. Not someone like you. She let out a soft, bitter chuckle. And what do you know about someone like me? Aidan hesitated. Nothing. And that was the problem. But instead of answering, he did something unexpected. He removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders. She stiffened under the touch, her lips parting slightly in surprise. I'm not here to pity you, Elena, he said, his voice lower now, softer. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I don't know why, but I can't walk away. Something flickered in her eyes, a crack in the walls she had built. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with something undeniable, something that neither of them could name just yet. Then she spoke. I was a musician once, she said, barely above a whisper. Aidan stayed silent, knowing instinctively that whatever she was about to say, it mattered. I had dreams, she continued, her gaze distant. I had a life, a home, a future, And then one day, it all disappeared. Her fingers tightened around the violin. And now I'm just another face in the crowd, another story no one wants to hear. Aidan felt a strange ache in his chest. It was the first time she had opened up, even a little, and somehow he knew there was so much more she wasn't telling him. Aidan reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black key card. "A hotel is 10 minutes from here," he said, holding it out. "It has a warm bed, a hot shower, and more food than you can finish, just for one night." Elena stared at the key card for a long time. Then she looked up at him, her eyes filled with something unreadable. "And what do you want in return?" Aidan exhaled, shaking his head. "Nothing." Silence, a hesitation. Then, slowly, she took the key card from his hand. Her fingers brushed against his, and in that fleeting touch, something shifted. Neither of them spoke, neither of them moved. But in that moment, standing beneath the broken street lamp with nothing but the sound of distant rain, a connection was formed. And neither of them would ever be the same again. The suite was grand, far beyond anything Elena had seen in years. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the shimmering skyline of New York, the city lights twinkling like a million tiny stars. Soft golden lighting bathed the elegant interior, and the crisp scent of fresh linen filled the air. Elena stood frozen in the middle of the room, still damp from the rain, her violin case clutched tightly in her hands. "This is too much." Three. "I know this is a lot. It's hard." And Aidan, standing near the bar, loosened his tie and poured himself a drink. He turned to face her, studying the unease in her posture, the way her fingers trembled slightly. "It's just a hotel room, Elena," he said, sipping his whiskey. "You don't have to stay." She looked up at him then, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "Then why did you bring me here?" Aidan exhaled, setting his glass down. He didn't have an answer. "Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because you're the first person who's ever made me question everything I thought I knew. Because I see something in you that I don't understand." Instead, he shrugged. "'Cause you looked like you needed a place to rest." Elena let out a soft, almost bitter chuckle. "Rest?" She shook her head, glancing around at the sheer opulence surrounding her. "I don't belong here, Aidan." His name. It was the first time she had said his name. And damn it, why did it sound so different coming from her lips? Aidan's jaw tightened. "You don't belong on the streets either," he countered, stepping closer. Elena's breath hitched slightly, but she held her ground. That's not for you to decide." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick, charged with something unspoken, something dangerous. Then Aidan's voice dropped lower, softer. "I just want to understand you, Elena." She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the strap of her violin case. "Understanding me won't change anything." Aidan watched her for a long moment before finally sighing. "Fine," he said, stepping back. "At least take a shower and get some rest. You can leave in the morning if you want." Elena hesitated, then, with a small nod, she turned and disappeared into the bathroom. Aidan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure what the hell he was doing anymore. All he knew was that Elena Carter was unraveling him in ways he never expected. An hour passed. Aidan sat on the couch, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't make sense of. Oh, then a soft sound drifted through the air. Music. His breath caught. He turned, his gaze locking onto the woman standing near the window. Elena had changed into the robe the hotel provided, her damp hair cascading over her shoulders, but it wasn't her appearance that stole his breath. It was the way she played. Her violin rested under her chin, her fingers gliding over the strings as if they were an extension of her soul. The melody was slow, haunting, filled with longing. Aidan didn't realize he was holding his breath until she stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena turned to him, her brown eyes glistening. "Music is the only thing that's never left me," she whispered. Aidan stood, his chest tightening. The raw emotion in her voice hit him harder than he expected. "What happened to you, Elena?" he asked, his voice barely above a murmur. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she took a deep breath. And finally she spoke. "I wasn't always like this," Elena admitted, her voice thick with something painful. "There was a time when I had everything: a home, a career, a man I loved." Aidan's entire body stiffened. Loved. A strange, irrational feeling twisted in his gut. "What happened?" he asked, his voice calmer than he felt. Elena swallowed, her fingers tracing the edge of her violin. "I was engaged once," she said, her eyes distant. "To a man who promised me the world." Aidan clenched his fists. She continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He told me he loved me, that I was his forever. And then one day, he accused me of something I didn't do." Aidan's heart pounded. "Accuse you of what?" Elena's breath hitched. "Of being a gold digger." Silence. Aidan felt as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. Was from a wealthy family," Elena continued. "I wasn't. His parents never approved of me, but I thought love was enough." She let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out I was wrong." Aidan's throat went dry. "What did he do?" Elena's eyes met his. "He left me." Aidan's jaw tightened. Not just left her, destroyed her. And in that moment, as realization dawned, Aidan Kingsley felt something dark rise inside him. Because he knew who her ex-fiancé was. And it wasn't just anyone. It was his own brother, Daniel Kingsley. Aidan's entire world shifted in that moment. The past that he had buried, the betrayal of his own flesh and blood, came rushing back. Years ago, his younger brother, Daniel, had betrayed their family, stolen money, and disappeared. And now Aidan understood. Daniel hadn't just ruined their business, he had ruined her. Elena, Aidan's hands curled into fists. She didn't know. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know he was connected to the man who had destroyed her. And suddenly he felt something dangerous inside him. Something protective, something possessive, something that whispered, "Daniel took everything from her once, but he will never touch her again." Aidan looked at Elena, her fragile form standing by the window, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. She had no idea what was coming, but Aidan did. And from this moment forward, he was never letting her go. Aidan stood in the shadows of his own hotel suite, watching Elena as she sat by the window, her silhouette bathed in the golden glow of the city lights. She had no idea that the man who had shattered her life was his own brother. No idea that fate had tangled their paths in a way neither of them could have foreseen. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. Daniel Kingsley. Aidan had spent years trying to forget him, trying to erase the betrayal that nearly tore their family apart. But now, staring at Elena, the woman Daniel had broken, the woman who unknowingly had captured Aidan's heart, he felt something shift inside him. Rage, guilt, an overwhelming need to protect her, but more than anything, a dangerous, undeniable attraction, one that was getting harder to ignore. "Elena," Aidan's voice was softer than usual, careful. She turned slightly, her deep brown eyes meeting his, filled with quiet pain and exhaustion. You're staring. He didn't deny it. Instead, he took a slow step forward, the distance between them shrinking. I was just thinking about how strong you are, huh? Elena let out a soft, bitter chuckle. I don't feel strong. Aidan tilted his head. You survived. Her gaze flickered away, her fingers tracing the edges of the violin case beside her. Sometimes I wish I hadn't. His chest tightened. Those words hit deeper than he expected. The idea of a world without her in it? It made his stomach turn. Elena. He took another step closer, his voice low, controlled. You don't have to fight alone anymore. She swallowed, her lips parting slightly as if to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she looked up at him, something vulnerable flashing in her gaze. For the first time, she let someone see her. Not the woman the world ignored, not the broken musician abandoned on the streets. Just Elena. And damn it, Aidan wanted her. Not just to help her, not just to fix what his brother had broken. He wanted her in a way that had nothing to do with guilt, everything to do with desire. Aidan reached out, hesitating only for a second before brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. His fingers barely grazed her skin, but it was enough. Enough to send a shiver down her spine, enough to make her breath hitch, enough to make the air between them dangerously charged. She didn't move away. Instead, she closed her eyes for a brief second, as if letting herself feel something she had long denied. Aidan's voice dropped lower. You don't have to be afraid of me. Elena's eyes fluttered open, locking onto his. I'm not afraid of you. A pause. I'm afraid of what I might feel. Aidan's jaw tightened. God, she was making this impossible. What if... He exhaled, his fingers grazing her cheek now, his control hanging by a thread. What if I feel it too? She sucked in a breath. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Then a knock on the door shattered the moment. Aidan cursed under his breath, stepping back. Elena looked away, blinking rapidly as if trying to break free from whatever spell had just wrapped around them. Aidan turned toward the door, his jaw clenched. He already had a bad feeling about this. And he was right, because when he opened it, his past came crashing into his present. There, standing in the doorway, was the man Aidan never wanted to see again. Daniel Kingsley, his younger brother, the one who stole from their family, the one who disappeared without a trace, and the one who destroyed her. Elena. Aidan's breath turned cold, his body went rigid, his muscles coiled with tension. Daniel smirked, leaning casually against the doorframe, looking as smug and careless as ever. Big brother. Long time no see. Aidan didn't move. His eyes flickered with nothing but pure fury. What the hell are you doing here? Daniel chuckled, shoving his hands into his pockets. Relax, Aidan. I just need a little financial assistance. His gaze swept past him, landing on the hotel room's interior. Looks like you're doing well for yourself. Aidan felt his blood boil. The audacity. Daniel, the man who vanished after ruining everything. The man who had never once looked back. And now he had the nerve to ask for money. Before Aidan could respond, a soft gasp echoed behind him. He turned sharply. Elena. She was standing there, her face pale, her body frozen. And when Daniel's eyes landed on her, all the color drained from his face. Elena. The room turned silent. Avon saw the moment the recognition hit his brother, the shock, the guilt, the panic flashing across his face. Elena, on the other hand, looked like she couldn't breathe, like the world had just been ripped out from under her feet. Aidan's entire body tensed, and in that moment, one thing became crystal clear. Daniel Kingsley wasn't just his past anymore. He was about to destroy everything again. Underscore, 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 underscore. Oh, oh, oh. Um, yeah, it got dismissed. Um, I think it was a dismiss anyway. I didn't. Uh, the silence in the suite was suffocating. Elena stood frozen, her heartbeat thundering in her ears as she stared at the man she never thought she'd see again. Daniel Kingsley, her past, her ruin. Aidan stood beside her, his entire body coiled with barely contained rage. His blue eyes, usually calm and unreadable, burned with something dangerous. Daniel shifted on his feet, his smirk fading. His confidence, the arrogance he had walked in with, was gone now. Elena. His voice was softer than she remembered, more hesitant. But it was too late. Too late for apologies, too late for explanations, too late for everything. Her fingers trembled against her violin case, her grip tightening as she forced herself to breathe. You have no right to say my name, she whispered. Daniel exhaled sharply. Elena, please. Eden took a slow step forward, placing himself slightly in front of her, protective, unyielding, possessive. She doesn't want to hear anything you have to say. His voice was low, edged with a fury that made even Daniel hesitate. Elena swallowed, forcing herself to speak, though her throat burned with the weight of memories. Why are you here? Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced at Aidan, then back at her, his gaze flickering with something she couldn't quite name. Because I need help, he admitted. A bitter laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. Help? The irony was cruel. You ruined me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but every word cut deep. You left me to rot in the streets. And now, after all these years, you come here, asking for help? Daniel ran a hand over his face. I made a mistake, Elena. Aidan let out a sharp, humorless laugh. A mistake? That's what you call it? Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. You don't understand, Aidan. Aidan's eyes darkened. Oh, I understand perfectly. His voice was calm, but deadly. You used her. You accused her of being a gold digger while you were the one stealing from our family. Daniel flinched. Elena's breath hitched. What? Aidan turned to her then, his expression softening slightly. Didn't just betray you, Elena. His voice was quieter now, careful. He betrayed me, too. Elena's world spun. The man who had ruined her life had also destroyed the only person who had ever shown her kindness. Fate was cruel. So cruel. Daniel took a step closer, desperation in his eyes. Elena, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm out of options. I have nothing left. Elena's entire body stiffened. Nothing left, just like she had nothing left the day he walked away. Just like she had nowhere to go when he turned his back on her. Just like she had no one when the world swallowed her whole. Aidan must have sensed it, the way her breathing turned shallow, the way her fingers trembled, because suddenly his warm hand covered hers, grounding her. Elena looked up at him, and in that moment, the world fell away. There was only him, only the man who had fought for her, protected her, the man who had never once treated her like she was less. Aidan Kingsley, her savior, her undoing. She sucked in a sharp breath, realization crashing into her like a tidal wave. She loved him. Somewhere between the stolen glances, the quiet conversations, the warmth of his presence, she had fallen hopelessly, desperately in love with him. And it terrified her because Love had destroyed her once before, and now she was standing at the edge of that same cliff again. Aidan saw it in her eyes. The moment she pulled away, the moment fear won. He had never been afraid of losing anything before. Money, power, status. He could lose it all and still survive. But losing Elena, that was the one thing he wasn't sure he could come back from. And yet, as he watched the war raging inside her, he knew she needed to be free. She had spent too long trapped by her past, by her pain. And if he held on to her now, if he forced her to stay, she would become just another cage. Aidan clenched his jaw. He wouldn't be that for her. He wouldn't be the reason she looked at love with fear again. So he did the only thing that made sense. He let her go. Elena, his voice was soft, steady, final. She hesitated, her brown eyes searching his, as if waiting for him to stop her. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a single envelope. Her brows furrowed. "What is this?" Aidan exhaled, placing it in her trembling hands. "My entire fortune," he said quietly. Elena's breath caught. Aidan held her gaze. "I transferred everything to you." The room spun. "You're lying." A sad smile touched his lips. "Check the papers. It's all yours." Elena's hands shook. Why? He could have told her the truth, that he loved her, that she was the only thing that had ever mattered, that she deserved the world, and if he couldn't give it to her, then at least he could make sure no one ever hurt her again. But instead, he simply said, "Because you deserve to have a choice. Because love should never feel like a trap. Because if she wasn't ready to stay, he wouldn't beg her to." Elena's lip trembled. "You can't just give everything away." Aidan smiled. "I already have." Tears welled in her eyes. He reached out, his fingers brushing one last time against her cheek. And then he walked away. Elena stood in the Grand Hotel suite, the envelope still clutched in her trembling hands. The silence in the room was unbearable. Aidan was gone. And with him, so was the last piece of warmth she had ever felt. Her chest rose and fell with ragged breath, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop the tears. Not when she looked down at the documents inside, not when she saw the proof that he had truly done it. Aidan Kingsley, the billionaire who had everything, had given it all away. For her, her fingers gripped the papers tighter, her mind screaming, why? Why would he do this? Why would he walk away when he could have had anything? Why, after everything, did he not ask her to stay? Because he knew that if she stayed now, it would be out of obligation, out of guilt, out of fear. And that wasn't love. Elena sank onto the couch, staring at the city skyline beyond the glass windows. For years, she had believed love was just another illusion, a cruel lie meant to break people. Daniel had proven that. But Aidan had given without expecting anything in return. And it terrified her because what if she was the one who didn't deserve him? 3 days passed, 3 long, agonizing days. Elena barely left the suite. She had enough money to do whatever she wanted now. She could disappear, start a new life, buy a home, rebuild her career. And yet, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't stop thinking about him. She had spent so long running from the past that she had never once stopped to wonder, what if she was running from the future too? With a knock on the door, her heart slammed against her ribs. For a split second, she thought it was him. But when she opened the door, it was Daniel. Elena's stomach twisted. What do you want? She asked, her voice sharp, her body rigid. Daniel sighed. He looked tired, defeated, like a man who had lost everything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, he murmured. For everything. Elena stared at him. Too little, too late. I don't care, she said, stepping back. You can leave now. Daniel hesitated. You love him, don't you? The words hit like a bullet. Elena's breath hitched. Her fingers curled against the door frame. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Daniel let out a small, bitter laugh. You're lucky, you know. Aidan? He's not like me. He glanced at her one last time, his voice quiet. Don't lose him. And just like that, he was gone. That night, Elena sat alone on the hotel balcony, staring at the city below. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions, memories of Aidan, of the way he had looked at her, of the way he had touched her so gently, of the way he had let her go when every part of him had wanted to hold on. Because real love wasn't selfish. And Aidan Kingsley had loved her, truly, deeply, in a way she had never known before. Her chest ached. She had to find him. She had to tell him the truth. That she wasn't afraid anymore. That she loved him. That she didn't want his money. She just wanted him. Elena called his hotel. When he was gone, she checked his penthouse. Empty. She searched through every connection he had, but it was as if Aidan Kingsley had disappeared from the world. Panic set in. What if she was too late? What if she had already lost him forever? But then she found the letter, tucked inside a drawer in the suite, left behind without a word. Her hands shook as she opened it. Underscore, 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 underscore. Alina, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I don't expect anything from you. I don't expect you to come looking for me. I just want you to live the life you deserve. Be happy, be free, and know that if I ever had to choose again, I would still choose you. Aidan? Her heart clenched. She had to find him. She had to fight for him the way he had fought for her. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat, ran out of the hotel and into the pouring rain. She had no idea where he was, but she didn't care because this time she wasn't going to let him go. Elena ran through the city, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her heart pounding harder with each passing second. The rain poured down in relentless sheets, soaking through her clothes, but she didn't care. All she could think about was him, Aidan. She had searched everywhere, his hotels, his business offices, even his private penthouse. Gone. No one knew where he was, but she refused to believe that this was the end. Because if she had learned anything from Aidan Kingsley, it was that love, real love, didn't just fade. It survived, and now she would fight for him the way he had fought for her. Exhausted, soaked to the bone, Elena finally collapsed onto a bench outside a small cafe. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone, desperation clawing at her. Think, Elena, think. Where would he go? And then, it hit her. The way Aidan had always looked out at the sea. The way his eyes softened whenever he talked about leaving the city, about disappearing to some place where no one knew his name. He had once mentioned a private retreat, a cabin by the ocean. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She quickly pulled up a map, scanning the coastline, and there, a remote location, barely marked. It had to be him. Gripping her phone, she didn't waste another second. She hailed a cab, barely managing to get the words out. To me to the coast now. By the time Elena reached the coastline, the sky had turned a deep shade of blue, stars barely visible through the misty air. The rain had finally stopped, but the ocean roared, wild and untamed, just like the storm inside her. Her eyes scanned the shore, searching. Then she saw it, a cabin nestled between tall cliffs, its lights dim, as if someone inside wanted to disappear from the world. Her breath caught. It had to be him. She ran, her feet pounded against the damp sand, her pulse racing. She reached the wooden door, her hand shaking as she raised her fist. Anne knocked. Silent. She knocked again, harder this time. Aidan! Nothing. Her chest tightened. No. She couldn't have come all this way only to lose him now. Without thinking, she tried the handle. Unlocked. She pushed the door open, stepping inside. And there he was. Aidan sat near the fireplace, a half-empty glass of whiskey beside him. His shirt was slightly unbuttoned, his hair tousled, his usual sharp presence replaced by something lost. Elena's heart clenched. This wasn't the Aidan Kingsley she knew. This wasn't the powerful, confident man who had once stood in towering glass offices, commanding entire empires. This was a man who had given up. And it broke her. She took a shaky breath. Aidan, his head snapped up. For a moment, just a moment, his blue eyes widened in pure shock. Elena. His voice was rough, hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in days. She swallowed hard. You really thought I wouldn't find you? He stared at her, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. You shouldn't be here. Her breath hitched. Why? A bitter smile touched his lips. Because I have nothing left to give you. The words shattered her. Because he still didn't understand. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. I never wanted your money, Aidan. His brows furrowed. Then why? Because I love you, she cut him off, her voice shaking. I love you, you stupid, stubborn man. Aidan froze. Elena took a step closer, tears brimming in her eyes. You think giving me everything was what I needed? That walking away was what I wanted? Her voice cracked. You gave up everything for me, but don't you understand? You are everything to me. Aidan sucked in a sharp breath. Elena, oh, no. Alator? No. Oh, no, I care what to say. Delta Wanga, Mare, Nabu, you walk it, yeah, don't go. I'll have to kindle living in his hands clenched at his sides. I didn't walk away because I wanted to. His voice was strained, pained. I walked away because I was afraid that I would hold you back, that you deserved more than me. Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks. But I don't want more. I just want you. Aidan exhaled sharply, his entire body tense. I don't deserve you. Elena reached out, her fingers trembling as they touched his cheek. You deserve to be loved, Aidan. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You deserve to be happy. His eyes darkened. And then Aidan grabbed raw. 1 second, she was standing in front of him, breathless. The next, his lips crashed against hers. Raw, desperate, unforgiving. Elena gasped against his mouth, but she didn't hesitate. She kissed him back. Her hands tangled in his hair, his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, as if he was terrified she would disappear if he let go. But she wouldn't. It was never letting go again. The kiss deepened, slow and aching, filled with all the words they had never spoken. The pain, the longing, the love that had always been there, even when they refused to see it. And when they finally pulled away, both breathless, foreheads pressed together, Aidan whispered, "You found me." Elena smiled through her tears. I'll always find you." And in that moment, Aidan Kingsley knew no amount of money, no amount of power, no amount of sacrifice could ever compare to what he had right now. Because he had her, and that was all he would ever need. The morning light streamed through the wooden framed windows of the cabin, casting golden hues across the room. Elena stirred, her fingers curling slightly against the warmth beside her. Rain, it was still there, still real. She opened her eyes slowly, turning to face him. He was already awake, lying on his side, watching her with a look she had never seen before. Raw, unfiltered, completely in love. She exhaled softly, her heart pounding. "Are you just gonna stare at me forever?" she whispered, a small, teasing smile on her lips. Aidan's own lips twitched, but his gaze never wavered. "Probably." His voice was deep, husky, dangerously intoxicating. Elena rolled onto her side, her fingers trailing lightly over his jaw. "You look different." His brows raised slightly. "Do I?" She nodded, tracing the edge of his lips with the tip of her finger. "Lighter. Less burdened." Aidan caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. His eyes softened. "That's because, for the first time in my life, I'm not carrying the weight of the world alone." Elena's chest tightened. God, how had she ever thought she could walk away from him? This man, her man, had given up everything for her, and now she would spend the rest of her life proving that he never had to give anything up again. A week later, Elena stood in front of an old, abandoned building near the heart of the city. It was worn down, the paint chipped, the windows boarded up. But she saw something beautiful. Aidan stood beside her, hands in his pockets, watching her curiously. "You sure about this?" Elena turned to him, eyes shining with excitement. "I don't want to just take the money you gave me and live in luxury, Aidan," she smiled. "I want to build something with it." He studied her for a long moment, then exhaled. "All right," he murmured. "Tell me your vision." Her heart soared. She took his hand and intertwined their fingers, squeezing gently. "A music school." Aidan's brows lifted. "For kids," she continued, "for people like me who had dreams but lost them, for those who never had a chance to chase what they loved." Aidan looked at the building again, and this time he saw what she saw. A a future, a place where lost dreams could be revived. And for the first time, he wanted to be a part of something that wasn't just about money. He wanted to build this with her. A slow smile spread across his face. "Then let's do it." Elena grinned. "Really?" Aidan chuckled, pulling her close. "Elena, I just gave you my entire fortune. If you think I'm about to back out on a music school, you don't know me very well." She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I do know you, Aidan Kingsley." His arms tightened around her waist, his voice a soft whisper against her ear. And I know you, Elena Carter. Two souls once broken, now healing together." Months passed, and the music school opened its doors to the world. Children filled the halls, the sound of laughter and melodies blending in a way that made Elena's heart swell with pride. And beside her always was Aidan. She would catch him sometimes, watching her with that same unwavering, adoring gaze, like she was the most precious thing he had ever found, like she was his home. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Elena stood on the balcony of their new apartment, gazing at the skyline. Aidan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Penny for your thought?" She leaned into him, exhaling happily. "Just everything." He pressed a kiss to her neck. Regrets? She turned in his arms, placing her hands against his chest. Only one. His brows furrowed slightly. What? Elena smiled. That we didn't find each other sooner. Aidan's expression softened. We found each other when we were meant to. She tilted her head. You believe that? His lips brushed against hers, slow and deep, full of promise. Full of promise. Forever. I do, he whispered, and as she melted into his kiss, Elena knew she had she found things she never do again. Love, a home, and a future worth holding on to forever.